Time and again, the world bears witness to truths seldom said. Lend an ear. We promise enlightened, informed conversation. My name is Robert, and this is Seldom Said, the place where conversation matters. Welcome back. My name is Robert Amato. The program is Seldom Said, the place where conversation matters. We have two rather imposing guests today. Chen Drachman, the manager of communications at ELEM, an Israeli organization that has its offices in New York City, and Liora Attias. Ken, welcome to Seldom Said. I know you wanted to introduce your associate.
My boss and a friend. But I think, Liora, I will let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi. So my name is Liora. I am the Chief Operating Officer of ELEM Youth in Distress in Israel here in the United States.
And that is the introduction.
And that is the introduction, unless you want me to go further.
We'll come back to you with some questions later on, but
sure.
We have some great and wonderful things planned. The operating officer, okay, so be it. Now, I'd like to start with a little bit of personal backgrounds. Can both of you just bring us up to date as to who you are, where you've been, and what's brought you to this time and place?
Again, Liora, I will let you start, unless you would prefer I start. Whatever
you can start.
No
All
right,
go ahead.
So as you mentioned, my name is Chen. I was born and raised in Israel, born and bred. Moved here now, I want to say 13 years ago, this last February, after my army service. So yeah, I was about 23, and I come from, my background is, I don't know, diverse, let's say. I am also a filmmaker and a writer. Been with ELEM for about 3 years, first as a social media manager. Later on, we added outreach to this position, and now I'm the manager of communications, and that's where I am and where I've been.
And Liora?
Yeah. So I actually was also born and raised in Israel, moved to the United States when I was 12. My background is also somewhat diverse, but I did graduate with a bachelor's degree in psychology, and my passion always laid with helping youth at risk or mothers at risk. And yeah, I currently am going for my master's at Johns Hopkins in nonprofit management, and I have been with ELEM for going on 10 years. It will be 10 years in August.
It's rather interesting. You both have diverse backgrounds. I'm wondering, and the audience would be rather curious too, as to whether you feel that difficulties amongst the young, particularly adolescents, are not predicated on nationality or culture or background, but are simply universal.
I think it's both. You know, there are certain aspects that are 100% universal. There is also something comforting a little bit about this thought, even though we are talking about youth at risk, the thought that wherever you are in the world, a lot of us are facing similar things. It's a way to bring us together, I hope. But there are certainly aspects, and if we're specifically, of course, talking about Israeli youth, that have to do with culture and place. And of course, the Israeli culture itself is very diverse. It's not a monolith. So even within one country, you have nuances of what the youth is dealing with.
What do you feel is the greatest misunderstanding then, predicated on culture and exchange and understanding each other, the greatest understanding between us as a people?
I think we're all just very stubborn and want things our way. You can get very, very specific here, but it can be politics, it can be religion, it can be the way a person dresses, it can be the way a person wants to identify. But at the bottom of all of this is, you know, our will to kind of like make others think the same way we do, while at the same time it comes from a place of like, I want to be who I am, I want to feel comfortable in that. Maybe the way to feel comfortable in that is for everybody around me to also think the same way. And that's a little misguided. And also it's kind of boring, don't you think?
I certainly agree. Ken, I'm wondering, basically, question that might be extrapolating from your comments, but if you were an adolescent along with Liora at the present time, previous to your Army service, do you think you would have benefited from ELEM?
You mean you mean a version of me nowadays or back in the day?
Version of you then?
You know, I'll answer and then I'll let Liora answer, of course. As a teen, I had multiple friends who either volunteered for ELEM in actuality or some attended. And because we have so many programs and because we serve the entire risk spectrum, so, you know, on the one end, it can be even regular teenage angst, let's call it, not belittling that at all. And I think teenagers are often misunderstood actually, and they feel isolated and lonely. So that can be on one end of the spectrum, along with, you know, a risk of dropping out of school, social anxiety. While on the other end, you have youth in prostitution, homeless youth. So considering we're dealing with the entire age risk spectrum, I would say that a lot of teens could have find themselves benefiting from one of our programs, especially since I think a lot of our programs, what they have in common is creating a sense of community for youth who feel otherwise isolated. So if you're a youth and you're looking for that sense of belonging, you can definitely find it in our drop-in centers. I'll say that. Liora, do you want to kind of, would you benefit from ELEM in your younghood?
I definitely would have. And I think Chen said it perfectly, that us as teenagers or young adults, we're always looking for community and we're always looking for a sense of belonging. And ELEM provides that. And I think that is something so wonderful that I know in my young self would have benefited from. And I think every youth in Israel or even internationally would benefit from.
I recently had a conversation with a cultural historian. He presented the argument that adolescence or teen years was not something that existed prior to World War II. And he took the position that we pander too much for age differentiation, and we should simply say childhood and early adulthood. Do you feel that adolescence is a place and time?
I think it is, especially if you look, there's a development. There's no doubt that there's a, you know, development is a process, correct? The way you're thinking at 14 is not the same way you're thinking when you're 9. And the way you're thinking at 18 is not the way you're thinking when you're 14. But I'll tell you this, people who are being traumatized in their formative years, I mean, always, people who are being traumatized always, it's hard. It's always going to be a part of your life. But when it happens in your formative years, it might actually be harder to get over it because you haven't lived necessarily long enough to even realize in real time that you're being traumatized. So that's not to say or belittle, you know, the trauma of older people. I just think that the more experienced we are and the more we're seeing the world around us, it might be easier for us to identify in real time that something bad is happening to us. And for youth still in their development and young people, it might also not always be the case. And the ramifications of that, I think, are much more severe. But that's just a personal opinion. What do you think, Liora?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. To answer your question, I think developmentally, absolutely, adolescence is a critical time in every person's growth. So there is a middle, right? So childhood and adulthood is much different than your teenage years. So to answer the question, yes, I do think
it's a stage in time.
It is a stage in time. And as Chen said, you do the way you would behave, the way you would think at the age of, let's say, 9 or at the age of 21 is much different than the way you think and behave at the age of 14, 15, 16, or even 17.
And of course, Bob, here is where we get into the cultural differentiation, right, between Israel and other places, because in your teenhood, you're starting to think about your army service. And when you serve, I think you still fall under the definition of a young adult. Like I served between 19 and 21. That's very much young adulthood. So you can't ignore that at the very least, if nowhere else in the world, though I just mentioned it is a universal thing, in Israel, it's definitely a stage in time.
Increasingly, it's come to my attention that women in Israel are literally as equal as any culture in the world. And that's certainly underlined by the fact that you did military service on an equal footing with men. Do you feel that Israel is at the forefront of gender specificity?
It's a complicated question currently because some stuff are happening in Israel that are not ideal for let's say any sort of other. And we live in a world when women are still being considered as an other globally. I mean, we can obviously talk about the pay gap here in America as well. So I will say some definite strides have been made in Israel. It's not 100%, even women who serve as pilots or women who serve as combat, that took legal battles to get to that point. I'd say right now, many things are better than they used to be for sure. The work still continues. You will see a lot of women in high tech. You will see a lot of women in the corporate world. The forefront, it's hard to say, because actually, even though a lot of almost every nation in the world have some sort of an army, not many nations have a mandatory service. So to see actually women who you can, say in a clear cut, not the nicest way, are being forced to serve, but actually fighting to serve in what they want to serve, meaning I want to be a pilot, I'm going to fight for it, even though this entire service is mandatory. They're fighting for their choice within a system that doesn't always give you a choice. And I say in this way, in that specific aspect, I think Israel is unique.
That's rather interesting.
Thank you.
The idea of stages in one's life that are critical for either of you or both of you. Was there a moment, an epiphany, if you will, when youth and culture became a life purpose? Where in a sense you said, well, I've thought about medicine, I've thought about law, but what I want to do is deal with people, to deal with the young. Was there a moment you remember as a young adult?
Yeah, I would say for me, absolutely. When my past, I have experienced a lot of issues that, our youth at ELEM experience: homelessness, abandonment from a family that, you would expect to love and support you. I've never had that. So I have experienced a lot of what I hear our youth experiencing. As I was choosing my career path, I knew that I wanted to, my dream has always been to change the world in some way, or to make an impact. And I knew that I wanted to help young mothers or youth who were or are in the same situation that I was once in. And that was very important to me. And so when I went to, when I was looking at schools and looking for what I wanted to do, I knew that I wanted to go down the path of, I graduated with a degree in psychology because I knew that that was something that I wanted to do. And then, in 2014, I found ELEM. And although it wasn't necessarily helping youth one-on-one, because all our programs are in Israel, I still very much feel that I have a significant impact on our youth in Israel and the work that we do on the ground in Israel. And, I'm very proud of my role, but also of the organization and the many lives that we are saving over 40 years now. So it's incredible.
That is incredible. For the American audience and a young person listening, Is there the possibility of ELEM being applicable to the United States? And is it possible for American young people and students to deal with it, join of it, and play a role in it?
Is it applicable? I mean, absolutely. I mean, homelessness is very big here in the United States. You know, I read a very scary statistic the other day that in the United States, 700,000 youth are homeless in the United States again. And that's a very scary, you know, thing to know. And although there are homeless shelters and other programs that help youth at risk, I would love to see ELEM, you know, ELEM's programs duplicated here in the United States, because I think that what they do is incredible. And I think they go beyond just giving beds or basic needs. They go, you know, they support, they give guidance, they seek youth who are in this despair and in need on the streets. And I think that's such an incredible organization that I would love to see duplicated here.
Yeah, and you know, like Liora mentioned, we're celebrating our 40th year this year. This is it's a 40 years of legacy of saving people. And you know, we do have models, some sort of models in that we follow in our work that are unique, which is part of why we have received special consultative status from the United Nations in the field of at-risk youth. And on multiple occasions, ELEM actually, you know, we teach, our staff in Israel will go to universities in Israel and teach our work, and on occasion even abroad. I think there's definitely a room to bring ELEM professionals here in Israel to at the very least discuss the unique, you know, the unique techniques that we're using. And a big part of it is giving the youth an environment that is informal. So when they come to a youth center, right, even though our professionals who work there come from backgrounds like criminology and psychology and psychiatry, the center itself is a very informal setting. So the youth doesn't feel like they're going to a therapy session. They feel like they're coming to hang out with friends and you know, drink a cup of coffee and eat some snacks and play board games and have conversations with their peers and with staff and volunteers. And we do some things that I just, you know, I haven't seen anywhere else, like, you know, our outreach vans. The concept might exist here in America, but ELEM is nationwide. So there is no, you know, a nationwide, I'm not even sure there's like a statewide organization here that's that really covers big chunks of the country and send out vans to seek youth in mass events when they might need help, or on the streets at night to help them get home, or just to give them an alternative to roaming the streets and getting into trouble.
Ladies, if I may, we're approaching our first station break. Hold those thoughts, because the applicability of your program is something that I'd love to pursue, and I'm sure the listening audience is curious about it. The program is Seldom Said. This is the place where conversation matters. My name is Robert. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to our rather short station break, but it's predicated on time and space. Dealing with the idea of applicability, either of you, if you'd like to take the question, I have spoken to many who feel, Israelis as well, that there is something unique about the Israeli family, more spiritual, more political, more attuned to the world around it, and more secular in its protective nature against the threats from outside. Are we reading too much into that?
You know, obviously it's a generalization, right? Again, as we mentioned earlier, the Israeli society is not a monolith. And Israeli society is not only Jewish people, right? So I can only speak to my personal experience and maybe make some educated guesses and say, you know, almost every Ashkenazi family in Israel would probably have a built-in Holocaust survivor. I know it sounds terrible, that term, a built-in Holocaust survivor somewhere in the family, but it's just the truth, you know, in my family, for sure, that was the case. And Mizrahi Jews also have been persecuted from their countries after Israel was established. That's the Jewish demographic. I think the Arab demographic obviously have struggled quite a lot. A lot of these families are separated between borders. That's really hard. So that's to say that I think by nature and by default and by circumstance, Israelis are very, strong-headed. Let's call it. And I don't know, secular. There's a very big religious element to Israel. Again, Muslim, Jewish, Christian. But I think that tendency to kind of like fight for what we deserve, unfortunately, comes from trauma. You know, we got that little piece of land, and we'll do what we need to to maintain it. And that goes for all Israelis, not just Jewish Israelis. And I'm saying this because I've heard it from Arab Israelis. I'm not just saying this because to be politically correct. There's a lot of Arabs in Israel who consider it their home and they want to protect it too. Enemies from within and from the outside. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
Indeed, it does. Talking about this kind of focus, I've done interviews with Israeli schools that invited Arabic students to participate, and also the Israeli baseball team, which was made up of anybody who could play. It wasn't predicated on religious belief. If I were to walk into an ELEM meeting, might I encounter Jews, Hasidim, Bedouin, everyone, Palestinian?
Definitely depends on which program. But 100% resounding yes. In cities like Tel Aviv or Jerusalem of Haifa, where not only are they huge cities, but they're mixed cities. They're cities that attract youth from all over the country, not just the youth from the region. 100%, if you go into a center or you go into a shelter, you'll see that. You'll see that diversity. And then again, we have towns that are more leaning one way or another, and in these specific programs, it's actually very important for us to be culturally sensitive, because the assumption is a staff member from the Arab community will understand the needs of Arab youth better than a Jewish staff member, and that's just the case, and that's just to cater. And the same goes for the Hasidic community. How can I, a super secular atheist Jew, understand what someone who might be struggling with leaving their religion or coming out in a religious home is facing? I will not. But if a staff member is from their community or someone who understands them, is there for them, available for them, that's huge. And so this is something we're actually very, very, so we'll have a center that's mostly Arab youth, and we'll have outreach events who go into Haredi communities. So then they will split women. One day they'll go for the women with women staff, and one day we'll go for the men with men's staff. And then again, there are the places like Tel Aviv. If you go into a center, you'll probably find everything and everyone.
Tel Aviv, large city. New York City, obviously large city. If I may, on a personal level, do you find yourselves as urban young women professional? Or do you find yourself with a desire for a smaller town life?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Do you want to go first, Liora?
It's interesting because I actually moved. I lived in New Jersey in a very urban town. And during the pandemic, I moved to Pennsylvania, to the Poconos, where it's a very quiet, secluded town. And I have never been happier. So, so that's what I prefer now. And I think, with age, it changes, right? Where I used to prefer to live in urban cities and be out and about every day and every night, I no longer feel that way. So I think with time it changes.
I never felt that way. I'm a very like, please let me be home by the time it gets dark kind of person. But I am at the same time very, very urban. I think for me, I'm trying to kind of like enjoy the best of both worlds, meaning I live in Manhattan and I love living in Manhattan and I love being close to everything that Manhattan has to offer. While at the same time, I live uptown and it's kind of feel like living in the suburb, right? You still live in the city. It's so quiet up here. There's parks and there's kids and you see quinceañeras in the weekends and you see people do a picnic in the park, or at the same time in the winter I see parents with sleds and dogs all the time. It's adorable, it's lovely. So I think I kind of like lucked out, being in the city very close to everything while also living in a relatively quiet neighborhood, and having like that peace of mind at the end of the day.
It's interesting. I asked this question of a young Amish adolescent many years ago, and his response was interesting. He said, I'm Amish, certainly, but I'm Amish with a notebook. Are the advances and desires and expectations, are they all beyond the realm of any geographic location?
It's tough, right? Because if you look at other countries in the world that's struggling with things that, if they knew what we're talking about, they'll be laughing because like we don't even have food, So I feel like places like that unfortunately need outside help to get over a certain threshold and then maybe dare to go further. But if you think about it from the perspective in our youth, of our youth in Israel, sorry, there's an airplane. I don't know. Hopefully you can't hear it. Can you hear it?
No, I cannot.
Great. Just to be safe. I don't want to speak over it. If you look at it from the perspective of our youth in Israel, dare I be optimistic for a second and say probably yes, because the one thing that I think is common in all the programs is our will to help them being able to imagine that future for themselves. Many of them come to us, or you'll ask them, what does ELEM mean to you? And they'll say, before I came here, I didn't dare to dream because I was in such a, I was at the very bottom, I hit rock bottom. I never saw a way out. And ELEM was that for me, the ability to dream again. There was one woman who wanted to go to pastry school and become a pastry chef or a baker, and for one person it can be serving in the army, because that kind of youth, with what they go through, the army don't always want them. Speaking about a mandatory service, imagine what it's like being turned away from something that it's mandatory. You're not even good enough to do the things that we're forcing everyone else to do. For some of them is to be able to rent an apartment for themselves and become financially independent, and for some of them is like do with their parenthood as parents, as young parents, what they never had as kids. So I think with the right tools, there's definitely the ability to overcome.
ELEM itself, 40 years, a great deal has happened, a great deal will happen in the near future. Can you give us a short précis history?
Yeah, absolutely. So ELEM was started 40 years ago, when a group of social workers went to Israel they went on a trip and they saw the need of youth at risk in Israel, because, we're talking about the 80s where, from what I hear, there weren't many services or programs for youth who were at risk. Usually, if a kid got in trouble, they would either put them in juvenile detention center and wash their hands and call it a day. But these group of social workers and our founder, and Bialkin, went to Israel. They saw the need and built ELEM to what it is today. Over 50 programs in practically almost every city. Chen, do you want to add anything else?
No, I mean, sorry, microphone. Yeah, I mean, we do like the fact that it's really like really came to life, practically on the Upper West Side, around a dining room table. It's like it's also a New York story. And as a New Yorker, and since our headquarters is as an Israeli and as a New Yorker, it's really nice for me personally to see these two things connect, because as a kid, of course, as an Israeli, ELEM is a household name in Israel. I would go as a Girl Scout door to door and ask people for donations for ELEM. So to hear that, oh, it has such roots in New York is actually quite nice.
If I were to ask you to summarize in one sentence or thought or word the ELEM philosophy, what would it be?
Oof, one word is really hard, but I would say, and not to sound cliche, it's probably hope. I think it's kind of like puts together everything we spoke of, that's ability to help them dream of a better future. And for that, it requires hope above all.
Yeah, I agree. One word is very difficult, but for me, it would be dream, but I think dream is kind of close to hope. So I would also say life. ELEM gives these youth an opportunity, a second chance at life, ultimately, because these youth do have a lot of trauma and they do come from very complicated backgrounds. So, if I hear quite often these youth who we serve say, if it wasn't for ELEM, I may not be here. If it wasn't for ELEM, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be so and so. So I think in one word, I would say life.
Interesting. When one judges what's happening in the United States and what you're doing there, speaking of there as Israel, race is everything here. It's at the end of every conversation. It's in every word. What is your view of the racial connotations and distinctions of what exists in the United States? And are they applicable in any way to what you see in Israel?
I appreciate the question, because people, I think, in America have a very specific perception of what race is, when in reality, if you kind of like open your mind, you understand that race works, while existing everywhere, works differently everywhere. Things that can bother people here will not necessarily bother people elsewhere, while other stuff that are relevant elsewhere will not be applicable here, if to use your word. I think there's definitely racism in Israel, because there's racism everywhere. I think it's naive to be, oh, everything's perfect. It's just not. It's not the case. I think people's go-to is to assume that, that the majority of it is Arab versus Jew. Well, in reality, you'll see places in Israel when there's it's quite harmonious. Like if you'll go into a hospital, you'll see like, Nahariya up north, which is where my mom is from and my beloved grandma is for. May she rest in peace. If I'm not mistaken, the manager of the hospital is Arab. We have an Arab judge on the Supreme Court. So I'm not saying this in order to say there is no racism against Arab Israelis, because there is, but there's also classism, and you also have Ethiopian Jews. So this is a kind of a makeup but the way Ethiopian Jews are being treated in Israel, you cannot compare it exactly, perfectly to what Black Americans are going through. It's not exactly the same thing, and their history is a different history. And their journey to Israel is something that is very, very specific to them. They came through, many of them came through the desert, walking days upon days to get to Israel. This is a origin story that is not shared in that sense by Black Americans, and they have their own tragic origin story. So I know it's a very this answer is all over the place, but maybe that's a good way of saying it is all over the place in Israel, so I'll say, in this sense, maybe that's the one thing it is actually in common, is it's all over the place here, it's all over the place there. It's not a monolith. It's a very diverse society, and some people are hateful, because that's the reality of the world, correct, no matter where they are, and those hateful people are usually the root of the problem, no matter where you are.
A strong statement. Something
Amen.
I was going to ask at the end of the interview, something we talked about in conversation. Does that make both of you optimists that is constantly being challenged?
Yeah. I mean, I will start by saying that I am 100% an optimist. I believe that good can happen. I believe that unity can happen. I believe that anti-Semitism can go away. Eventually, I want to believe it in that very,
You're
very hard.
super optimistic.
I am, because if I'm not, then I have to face reality that, this, listen, this is a problem. And I want to be an optimist and believe that eventually something will have to give and we'll have to come together and things will end. It could be a dream, but personally, I choose to be an optimist and believe that eventually we'll come together and this will stop.
Please, ladies, if I may be optimistic about our return to a discussion after the station break, but unfortunately, time's going by rather quickly. It's usually indicative of a good interview. We'll be back in a moment. My name is Robert, and the program is Seldom Said. Welcome back. My name is Robert. The program is Seldom Said. Two very special guests, internally motivated people who are making a difference. Chen Drachman and Liora Attias. Welcome back, ladies. I wonder if you could speak to the issue of the day-to-day difficulty in keeping such an organization going. What are some of the primary problems you've had that might be applicable to doing the same thing in the States, especially New York?
Can you explain further the second part of the question?
Certainly. There are certain difficulties that are inherent in any organization's beginning. ELEM is different and yet similar. What were the difficulties encountered in Israel to establishing the organization? And what do you feel are the difficulties in doing the same thing in New York?
Well, why don't I start by, I'm going to start this way. I think the thing that is the most challenging for us, that a lot of Americans do not know that ELEM exists in Israel. And that is a problem. I think people here, especially ones Jews who may not have traveled to Israel, or even who may have traveled to Israel, do not realize that there is a problem there. You may not walk over a homeless person or see someone doing drugs in an alley on your trip to Israel, but it does not mean that it does not exist. And the problem is very big. And our challenge here is getting that fact known and getting ELEM more known to the audience, so we can increase fundraising, so we can increase our outreach, so more people could help with solving the issues that is in Israel with at-risk youth.
And I think, everybody in a very honest way, when you work in a nonprofit, you're competing with a whole world of very worthy causes. That's to say, it's wonderful that people are out there doing the job, but it just means that, there's only a certain allocation of people who can do the giving, and we're all kind of trying to tell them, hey, our cause is better. I will say, because Israel is so politically complicated, I know a lot of Jewish Americans find it hard sometimes to give to Israel. They feel like they don't necessarily know where the money is going. ELEM is a no-brainer. Not only are we helping youth, we're helping youth of all backgrounds, So I really believe that we are helping to create here the next generation of Israelis, and we're implementing compassion and tolerance in them by being compassionate and tolerant towards them. No, if you ask me about challenges in Israel, it's really hard because our political system isn't stable. I'm not even getting into political opinion. I'm saying that in the last, I don't know, 4 years, we have changed 5, 6. I can't even count anymore. Now ELEM, some of our finances, they do come from government support, the Ministry of Welfare, the Ministry of Education, the things that you would expect. When the people who are the heads of these ministries constantly change, then the commitments the previous person made to you are no longer relevant. And that's not just ELEM. I can tell you that there are shelters that in Israel that are not operated by ELEM. There are like waiting lists for them, and they can't really keep letting new people in because there's no funding, because they're waiting for government funding. And that's an across the board thing, but it definitely does not help.
You've both spoken about changing the world at large, and yet your offices are part-time. Why the part-time nature? Is it a matter of money and time? And do you feel that it'll expand and change so there'll be an element of permanency?
Yeah, well, I will clarify that I am actually the only full-time employee. ELEM does in the United States does operate full-time, meaning that even though the rest of the staff is part-time, we still operate.
Liora is our permanency.
Yeah.
And thank God for that.
Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. We are all, the good thing about each and every staff member that works at ELEM that I'm very proud of is that each and every one is very passionate and very committed to ELEM. And not only the staff, but also the board of directors. They are they're so committed, and they love the work and the mission, and everyone that is involved with ELEM works so hard because we really do believe and are optimistic that we can help the youth of Israel, and through that we will make Israel stronger and healthier.
Close your eyes, click your heels, make a wish. You're
Yes.
starting a work day. Give me a typical work day.
Oh man. Well, typical workday for me starts around 8 a.m. It ends around 11 p.m. Again, I oversee fundraising, I oversee outreach and marketing with Chen. So there's a lot to do, not enough time, not enough hours in the day.
Never.
And again, because of our commitment, we really do want to see ELEM grow here in the United States, because we know that with our help, ELEM Israel can grow even further. And that means opening more programs, helping more youth, doing more. So yeah, my work day is never over. And I think I can speak for Chen and for every other staff member that even though they're part-time, they still feel like they're full-time, because
Yeah, it doesn't.
when you love the job so much, you give your all. So it really can feel like a full-time job.
ELEM is a state of mind.
Yeah.
Indeed.
A good state of mind, though.
I love that phrase, always have. It seems to me that this would lend itself perfectly actually, to a documentary. Has there been any thought about that?
Look, I'm a filmmaker. I have not thought about that, we're definitely talked about some sort of like artistic avenues. Liora, do you remember when we did the gala at the gallery, and we had Israeli actors? They took upon testimonials from our youth in Israel and kind of like did this immersive thing in the space where they're kind of almost like a play, and Liora was like, we should do a play. It's just, like Liora said, we have a million ideas and such little time, and yeah, and we have to work within our means. I definitely think there's a room to do a full-length documentary both here and in Israel, to kind of the beginnings, the journey, maybe for our 50th anniversary. A decade could be enough time to prepare for this.
And I think ELEM deserves a documentary. It'll be a very good documentary. That is for certain.
I agree. And I agree that the persons who are going to play the lead in the documentary that you both create are just entering the program now. So the voices will be young, the voices will be activist, and the voices hopefully will be successful.
And Bob, if you want to roll in the documentary, we can find you a part.
Do you want to be? Do you want to be? Do you want to be the narrator, Bob?
It'll be like our town, you know, Grover's Corners with me. It would be intriguing. What you're doing so lends itself, perhaps it's because the academies were just recently, but it so lends itself to a culture like ours that is visual and impatient. The interest span is football-like, 10 seconds in a play, rather than soccer-like, 30 minutes and a discussion. It would lend itself to something of the nature of permanency. Any notable success stories you want to refer back to? Times where you really had something that worked and you were grossly pleased by it and could not wait to share it?
Yeah, I mean, always comes to mind Diana Golby, one of our finest, who they're all very, very fine. Do not get me wrong, but she's a star, and I mean it in a literal way, because she comes from my hometown, Jolon, actually, and she used to attend the outreach van there, and yeah, she tells the story of how one day they handed over a guitar to her, and she plays guitar, she has a beautiful voice, and they told her, why don't you pursue something with it? And she ended up winning the Israeli version of Israeli Idol, essentially the Israeli version of American Idol, and went on to star on TV. And she's young. I think she's younger than me, and I'm 36. So you can see her on TV, in the theater. She's currently actually playing Yentl in the Hebrew, the Israeli version, currently on the National Theater in Israel. So she's starring in the play. So that's an amazing success story. Liora, do you have one in mind that you'd like to share?
Is there time for me to share?
Certainly, we'll make the time.
Okay. Well, my favorite story to tell is a story of a young woman named Yael. She actually came to visit us last year to tell her story to our donors and our audience. And I will share just a little bit of her story because it's her story to share, but she was abused as a child, and she found ELEM, and she received services from ELEM from a particular program called A Real Home in Tel Aviv for many, many years. And she is such a remarkable young woman because she is very vocal about the issues that she experienced. And she also is very vocal about I don't know if I should.
Yeah, keep going.
Keep going.
She's very vocal about the needs, right, and the services that is needed. And she even went to the Knesset,
which is our House of Representatives for listeners, the Israeli House of Representatives. Yeah.
Yeah. She even went to the Knesset and was vocal about a law that they were trying to pass where, I'm sorry, Chen, it was.
Yeah, it was. So basically what happened was the man who abused her was allowed back to the community where he committed the offense, which of course it's very traumatic for the people who've been through it. And the Knesset was considering passing a law that will not allow offenders to go back to the communities where they committed the offense. And she went and spoke very, very bravely, and that law passed, and she knows she played a part in it. And she's also she's a medic, she's a certified medic, she's a personal trainer, right?
She is a personal trainer, yeah. But again, if it wasn't, she played such a critical role in passing this law that, again, she's remarkable, and she's one of my favorite stories to share.
I shall be honest with you, speaking to you reminds me that you both sound so much like closet poets. Do you write much in the way of poetry and thoughts, keeping a diary?
I mean, I know Chen loves to write. So Chen, you can answer that question.
Yeah, I'm a writer, and I've been a writer probably since I was like 15, 16, when I did have a personal blog, and over the years had different versions of what that is. And I'm a screenwriter. That's what I do. And I'm also a manager of communications who is more often than not needs to write something for the purpose of organizational usage. Let's call it that way, I suppose. So I don't know. I always pride myself on writing the same way I speak. I don't want to surprise people when they're like, "Oh, your voice as a writer is so different from the way you speak." So maybe that's an intentional thing, or started as an intentional thing, but at this point I don't really distinguish between the two.
Someone just recently asked me, knowing that I was going to do this interview, for an example of Israeli slang. You talk about language and so forth. There are certain language types and tropes in this country that one needs subtitles for. In point of fact, is there an adolescent Israeli slang that you've had to master?
I mean, I'm sure Stefan Israel does. I'll tell you this: we always kind of mocked friends in Jerusalem because they have their own sub language. You know, they'll like, you know. And I served with multiple people from Jerusalem, and I have family in Jerusalem, so you can talk about a candy, and they will talk about a candy, and we're like, "What are you talking about?" And then they'll start describing. And we're like, "You don't know this candy?" We're like, yeah, but that's not what it's called. So definitely, like, you know, I'm gonna go ahead and assume that there, even though Israel is teeny tiny, different regions have different slangs. But for sure, in a day and age of social media and TV, there's definitely a shared thread. Every time I go home, or like, you know, my friends, I feel so out of the loop. My friends send me sometimes like a new person who does like this comedy sketches, and everybody in Israel repeats it, and they're like, don't be out of the loop. This is what you need to know before your next visit, you know. So there for sure is. And I think that the staff that is probably seeing them day to day is immersed in that. And I'm sure that if I go, I'll be an embarrassment when it comes to young people, you know. And that's just the reality of the situation.
We're within 1 minute of the end of this program. Love to do it again, ladies, because there's so much to be said and understood.
You got it. We're down.
We're down. Okay,
That is my slang that the kids will be embarrassed by.
indeed. Can we just in the last minute tell the listening audience how they can become involved?
Okay, well, yeah, 100%. The easiest way is to go to elem.org, ELEM.org. And from there, it's very easy to find us and what we do. And there are many, many ways to get involved, be it like volunteering here to help us at events, donating, of course, sponsoring events. You know, like I said, it's our 40th anniversary. We're definitely happy to work with corporations. We're looking for ambassadors who will speak about us more on social media and introduce us to their communities. We'd love to do parlor meetings and, you know, bring our mission to new people who are interested. Liora, did I miss anything? You follow us on social media. Yeah.
No, you didn't miss anything, but I will emphasize the importance of getting involved this year more than ever. It is a 40th, 40 years of saving lives. And if you are interested in getting involved, this year is the year. So
yeah, 40 years of saving lives and counting.
Yeah. And you can be involved and be a part of the impact of saving lives.
That's marvelous. It's a marvelous way to end. We'll be in touch. There is so much to be covered and said, and hopefully we can do this again and talk about the positive things that we've done together.
Wonderful.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob.
It's my pleasure, and it's certainly the pleasure of my listening audience. Program is Seldom Said. My name is Robert Amato. Be with us again next week.